All right. Hello, welcome to a special edition of The Raw Men. We are in London and we are interviewing Maryam Namazie, representative of the Council of Ex-Muslims of Britain. And it's so good to have us over on a Sunday morning. Thank you very much.
It's my pleasure.
Yeah, the first question I had, and this was my wife's question, was for those who may not have heard of you, what is the sort of history, or what is a short history of your secular and humanist activism?
Well, I was born in Iran, so I began my activism in defense of refugee rights, given the fact that when the Iranian revolution was expropriated by the Islamic movement and it became an Islamic state, my family, a lot of people I knew had to flee. So my first point of activism was really defending refugee rights, the right to protection, and then of course why refugees flee, which is a theocracy and an Islamic regime, so opposing Islamism in power. And I guess all the things that come with it, defending women's rights, equality, secularism being so key in all of this.
And we've all heard about the issues with the Syrian refugees in various places. What was the issues that you faced as an Iranian at that time?
Yeah, well, when we fled Iran, again it was like Syrian refugees today. Obviously the numbers were not as great, but there were still large numbers of people fleeing Iran. And it was trying to get a place where you could stay. So we went to India for 2 years because that was the only place we could manage to get in. And we weren't allowed to stay. So we came to Britain for a year, we weren't allowed to stay. We went to the US, and that's where we managed to get residency in New York City. And my parents still live in Yonkers, New York. So and I just moved back here in 2000.
I would like anyone watching this to understand what it means to be a refugee, because we obviously lack some empathy for people in those situations. What is the primary issue that you have? And let's say once you're out of your country, however you manage to do that, what is the next biggest issue that you?
Well, first of all, it's you end up deciding you have to leave sometimes with very, very few of your prized, loved possessions in a way. You leave with nothing very often. So, I have people asking me if they can see videos of me when I was a child. I don't have it, So it's basically like leaving everything behind, starting all over again in a place where you're considered a foreigner, so you don't really fit in. People may not like the fact that you're there. They might feel, that you're taking away jobs and this and that, whereas of course, I think in reality migrants, refugees bring a lot to the societies that they come to as well. So it is, coming and starting all over again. So for example, my parents were, my father was someone who was a well-known journalist, he was an economic advisor, and then when we got to the States, he became a security guard. He had to do courier work, driving around delivering packages, just treated really badly, humiliated, and that's the reality of a lot of people. But you just do whatever you can to pull yourself up and to make ends meet and to, begin your new life somewhere. So I remember when we went to the States, my dad had gone ahead, so we got to our new apartment and we had 4 mattresses on the floor and a TV. That's all we had in the house. And he took us, I think we arrived at 2 in the morning, and he took us to the 24-hour supermarket to show us that they have 24-hour supermarkets. And we were walking around in awe of the supermarket. So, it's starting all over again. And for me it was all right because I went straight to university, but for them, having to start right from the bottom again at an age where it's not so easy to do that.
So when you talk about advocating for for refugees, what is the most severe issue that you have to address for people?
Yeah, well, I think refugees, obviously like anybody else, they need food, they need housing, they need health care, all the basic protection issues, protection from abuse and so on and so forth, but they also need to feel welcome, and I think that is hugely important when you have lost everything. And I think one of the things people don't realize is how hard it is to move, to leave everything behind and come to a completely new country. We spoke English when we came, but a lot of people who come may not speak the language. and how difficult that is, and how wonderful it feels to have someone smile at you and tell you you're welcome and make you feel like you belong. You can settle much more quickly that way, and you can become more productive that way as well.
I don't feel like a typical American at all, because I know that there's huge issues with, you know, nationalism, patriotism, racism, and just ethnocentrism, and we're very insular. And I think it's because we don't have a lot of countries on our borders. We have huge oceans either way. But to my experience, the more multiculturalism you have, the grander your conversations, at least, you know, the broader the perspective, right? And I think there's a huge advantage to that. A lot of people don't, because, you know, I'm sorry to say, I know a lot of people intimately who don't want to know. I mean, don't want to know what's going on in other countries. You know, they just don't care if it doesn't immediately relate to them, and if it doesn't immediately shine the spotlight on them as being the best whatever. It's a very, very frustrating mindset to grow up in, and so I think I'm rebelling against the way I was raised somewhat. So, what was your next question, Tweet?
You were talking about the work you did before you immigrated here and after. You also do work opposing. I've seen some of your activism opposing Islam. Can you talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think that sometimes this is a problematic conversation, only because we live in a world where criticizing religion and criticizing the Islamic right, which is like the Christian right, is often seen as being the same as attacking Muslims. So it's always a conversation that has to be explained. You know, you can criticize Christianity without any explanations, without any background, whereas with Islam it's not as easy, and understandably so, because there is real racism that exists, and I don't want to be contributing to racism. On the other hand, I'm fighting for the right to be able to criticize Islam, to mock it, to denigrate it, just as you can denigrate or mock or, you know, dislike any sort of idea that's just bad. And religious ideas generally are very, very bad. You know, I am told that Islam was wonderful for its age. I don't believe that. There's no documentation to prove that. I think it's always nice to look back and say it was a golden age. Well, I'm not sure how golden it was for people who lived there at the time. But even if it was, let's say, give people the benefit of the doubt, even if it was wonderful, it's not so wonderful for today. And we have so many better ideas that we can rely on. Why would we want to rely on Islam? So I think for me, it's a bad idea that needs to be challenged. But because it is something that is punishable by death in 14 countries, you
14.
know, and blasphemy as well in many more is a crime that's punishable by death. In several others, it's a prosecutable offense. So even if it's not, you know, you're not executed for it, you can be imprisoned for it, you can lose your civil rights for it. So under those circumstances, I think in fact criticism becomes a duty. You know, if you can criticize it, well, you might not bother because you can do it. But if you're not allowed to do it, then you have a responsibility to do it, because it sort of pushes open the borders and boundaries and helps make it possible for more people. And I think given the fact that people like myself, we live in a country where we're allowed to do it, despite whatever accusations and all exist around it, then we should do it for people like Raif Badawi in Saudi Arabia, you know, Roya Nobacht in Iran, wherever, what have you.
What's your favorite example or story of when you mocked Islam? Do you have a favorite or a really colorful example?
I do. I have a favorite story when she mocked us. You know?
What's that then?
I want to see what yours is first.
I've never looked at it that way, like a colorful, like something that happened to me as a result of mocking Islam.
I think I've seen like creative examples from you. that.
Oh, like things that I've done
Yes.
Myself.
Yes.
Well, yeah. I mean, I did. Are you talking about the nude protest?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I did.
Didn't think about that.
Oh yeah, I didn't either. Well, what I did is I took the Iranian flag, which has an Allah in the middle of it, and I cut the Allah out, and I did a nude protest, and I wrapped the flag around me. So I put something much better in its place, basically.
Something rather pie-shaped.
Yeah. So it was it got a lot of attention in Iran, obviously, and surprisingly, a lot of people were for the act, just because I know Iran is often portrayed as an Islamic society, but it's the state that's Islamic, and there's actually a real anti-Islamic backlash taking place in Iran. So I got a lot of support from people there, and also, of course, a lot of opposition. But
I have a favorite a moment, which was when the IERA barged into the World Atheist Conference in Dublin, and you had the opportunity to address them in a very condescending way. And I thought this was brilliant because you're a woman and you're talking down to them like they're kids. That was beautiful. And then
that was nice.
when you're talking about free speech and living in a country where you're used to having free speech, I mean, I spent like a week outside of that environment. I was in Dubai, and just having a conversation as you do. I'm sitting at a restaurant, I'm talking to some Arabs, and they knew my position, so they're talking about their typical apologetics, the base level apologetics in favor of the Quran, and I started saying, but it also talks about flying horses and all these other things. So I listed like 5 different reasons to know that the Quran is wrong, and my host grabbed me by the arm and said, "We got to go."
Yeah.
And so I didn't realize I'm just talking, but there are other people who can hear me, and it's like a 4-year prison sentence for saying the Quran is wrong. Just that simple thing. So.
And this is the example I always give when people talk about polls that were taking place in countries where Islam has a role. I wouldn't take those polls very seriously because, a lot of people, anyone who's lived in the Middle East and North Africa will know that everybody lives a double life. You say one thing in public, you do another thing in the privacy of your home and amongst people that you trust. Mm-hmm. And it's the same actually here with people who live in the so-called Muslim community. We have ex-Muslim members who wear the hijab, but they'll come to one of our events, take it off, have a drink, and then put it back on and go out, go to the mosque. A lot of people lead double lives, so it's important not to have this homogenized view of the Muslim community or the so-called Islamic world. And for those very reasons that you say, we are always wary, even here, we are wary of what we say, where we say it. It's just it becomes part of your innate sort of sense, to know when to say things and when not to.
Have you gotten threats for your activism?
Well, I have gotten quite a lot of threats, both from the Iranian regime, because I'm also quite vocal against the Iranian government. So the funniest death threat I ever got from the Iranian regime was when they called and they said that this is the end of the line for you. We're going to get you once Ahmadinejad comes to power, and it was a recording. Yeah, and basically they had so many people to threaten that day. They just pressed the play button, and it just got every political opponent they could get.
This is a recording for you, Maryam
So
Namazie.
And also I think since starting the Council of Ex-Muslims of Britain and just highlighting the right to apostasy, because a lot of Islamists will say that, well, you can, there's no compulsion, you can leave Islam if you want. However, if you start publicizing it and calling for others to leave, then it's an act of treason, then it's an act that's punishable by death. So I've got quite a few non-Iranian sort of death threats after that since 2007. So it's been an interesting mix.
So when I was in Dubai, I understand that Dubai is credited as being the most progressive of all the Islamic states or Muslim nations or whatever the correct term is. Or, I guess Arab states is the right word, but they have this double standard where they have all these expatriate Europeans and Americans can go live there and they can buy alcohol and they can dress the way they want, but the Arabs have a different set of laws. And it's odd to me to see a racist legal system where if you have Arabian ancestry, then you have all these other prohibitions against you. And then, like you said, with living the double life. I went to a death metal concert in Dubai, and I was talking to Arab women who are dressed in jeans and and drinking alcohol and don't have the hijab on, of course. They're just trying to blend in with the Westerners. And their complaint with living in Dubai is that they can at least do this, but they said the only advantage to living in Dubai is that they're not in Saudi Arabia. So what you said about people living a double life, what a lot of Americans really don't understand is, and this is true of a lot of atheists too, when they look at Christians and they think of Christians as being like religiotards or idiots. And I want to promote the idea that I think religion has a set of behaviors that are attached to it in much the same way as not being sick necessarily, but like being drunk. So you're there are people that get drunk and they get really obnoxious. People that get drunk get really happy, but you understand that there's associated behaviors because when people like in the clergy project, when ministers realize that they no longer believe this, they'll come away from very right-wing religious perspectives and they find that they start voting more liberally, that they become more tolerant of homosexuality and other issues where there's a political shift in their ideology. So there is a behavior attached to the belief, and it's not the person generating it. And that's, when you talk about the Muslims, people need to understand that it's not like they're zombies.
Yeah, but even beyond that, I mean, the thing is, look, people are born into their religions. That's the unfortunate world that we live in. So we know this, we've said it ourselves many times, is that you're not born into a political belief of your parents, but you are born into a religious belief. And so people might be free-thinking, they might be feminists, socialists, whatever, atheists, but they are labeled Muslim.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one of the problems is when you just see people as Muslims, you don't see the diversity amongst them, and you don't see the fact that many of them don't necessarily agree. They were just born into it. I mean, I never read the Quran when I was a Muslim. I never had to wear the veil. I went to a mixed school. So I only realized how bad Islam is in political power when it became, part of the state. Otherwise, I was just, living my life the same way that many people are living it here. There were no such restrictions on me because my family wasn't very religious either. So even people who are religious are not necessarily Islamists, and I think this is the point I'm trying to make for a lot of people. Whereas I think a lot of people in the West do think that a Muslim is the same as an Islamist. And it's sort of like saying every Christian is, the KKK.
Yeah.
Which is obviously not the case.
I guess the audience I secretly hope to talk to is the people that I knew in the very remote desert areas of the western U.S. where I grew up. And I want them to understand that, like, the first couple of Muslims that I ever met fit all the negative stereotypes of that I've been primed to expect, right? Very closed-minded, very devoutly religious, and adamantly rude and objectionable and all of that. The next 5 that I met after that happened to be in college, and they were brilliant, articulate, thoughtful people, and were not at all what I'd expected, and I'm still practicing Muslims, but obviously moderate, which I didn't know that a moderate Muslim was even possible, at least moderate thinking college students, So I'm just trying to correct the ideas of dichotomies that a lot of people from my background have.
Yeah.
And then understand that we're dealing with a belief that's not necessarily attached to the person, and then on another level we have the belief as it's been integrated into the state and the completely separate problems that come from that. Because people really do look at Muslims with that label and then treat them like zombies, where that's the whole person and they're incurable.
Yeah, and I think that's just, the problem with that point of view is that then it no longer can see the resistance and dissent that's taking place. And the reality is that when you live under Islamic rules, that dissent is part and parcel of everyday life, because it tells you how to behave in every aspect of your life. So, if you go out and your veil is not on properly, let's say in Iran it's compulsory, you can be put in prison for up to 2 months if you're not properly veiled. But if you have it back more than you're supposed to, you can be arrested for it. So all the time there's this sort of fight between women and the morality police. So last year alone,
the very concept of morality police
exactly is outrageous, isn't it? So all the time you're having conflicts with them, and then everybody else in the world says, well, you're one and the same with the regime. Is just quite a disservice to all those people who are every day battling with them, on basic things. Valentine's Day is banned. heavy metal. There's a heavy metal band now, Confess, that's got the death penalty for playing underground music and promoting atheism and Satanism, as they call it, you know.
Is it just the same thing that the United States went into in the 80s, where every metal band was considered to be satanic?
Yeah, but but no one was punished to death for it.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no legitimacy that they're either promoting
right,
Satanism
yeah.
or atheism,
Yeah.
right?
No, exactly. It's
So
just,
it's just a
yeah.
stereotype.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It sounds like I listen to and read other Islamic or ex-Muslim activists, and their main issues with getting their message out is either from people on the left who are saying that you're being Islamophobic for criticizing it, or on the right who are lumping you in with extremists and can't see you as an ex-Muslim and a person.
There was a tragic news story that had some good benefit in the way that it was seen in the United States. It was a horrific story, completely bad, but there was and you can probably help flesh in the details because it was a few years ago. There was some kind of a demonstration, I think in Tehran, and the police came to try to shut it down. And a woman was shot and killed, and it was on camera. Somebody had their cell phone on it. And tragic event, as I said, but this woman wasn't wearing a hijab. She had a short haircut in a Western style. She's wearing Western style clothes. So she is somebody that Americans could easily identify with. She didn't have the markers of being the other, right? And so seeing her tragic death and seeing these people trying to resist the state, I would think would at least show some Americans that there is an underground, that these are people and they're trying to resist. You know, and we hear reports that in Saudi Arabia, for example, even though there's a death penalty for unbelievers, they're still reporting a rise in atheism, closeted, secret, concealed.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and the point you were raising, I think actually what's interesting is both the far right, the racists, and also this left, and I say this as someone who's on the left myself, they both lump us in with the Islamists. The far right does it so they can say we should all just get out, we should all be shipped back tomorrow because we're all savages. And then this section of the left says that in order to defend Muslims, they have to defend the Islamists, which is what they often do, because they don't see this dissent, which is why, like at Goldsmiths University, when I had a talk there, and the Muslim brothers, the Islamic Society brothers came to disrupt my talk, you had the Feminist Society and the LGBTQ plus society issuing a statement of solidarity with the Islamic Society and not with me. You know, and I think it's this sort of, and they're the progressives who think if they want to defend Muslims, they have to defend the Islamic Society. Whereas no, you should be defending the dissenters and those who are standing up for women's rights, for equality.
The very idea of feminists siding with Islamists is to me like sheep siding with wolves. You know,
Definitely, yeah.
It's so
But
absurd.
I think it goes back to this whole idea of identity politics where you've got this homogenized identity and people no longer show solidarity with political ideals, with social ideals. It's all with, this homogenized, authentic identity. So rather than defending women's rights or minority rights or gay rights, they're defending, we have to defend the Muslim, and that means defending the Islamic Society. It's just bizarre.
The whole point of the trip that I took to Dubai was to show me that there are people in these Muslim countries, both Muslim and non-believers, and how they're all real people, and how there is this, this undercurrent of duality, where people are trying to, let's say in Dubai they have a very progressive leader, but they want to make a first world nation and all this, but they can't because they've got ties to Sharia, and for whatever small amount they still use it, it's kind of like an anchor pulling them down.
But I mean, I think that leaders rely on Sharia because it's a good way of controlling and maintaining control and power. So, and it affects people's lives in really horrendous ways. I mean, even in places like Dubai, people are faced with Sharia laws, including sometimes expats are. who are caught having sex or, doing something they're not supposed to. You've got cases of women, for example, losing their children because Sharia's family code gives it to the husband irrespective of the welfare of the child. So it does have real repercussions on people's lives. It's not as wonderful as it often is portrayed to be. Obviously it's not as bad as a place like Saudi Arabia. But I think any degree that it does have, a say in people's lives, it's quite detrimental.
I'd like to have like a more nuanced discussion about what you're talking about with safe spaces, like, and the Goldsmith feminist solidarity with the Islamic Brotherhood rather than you and other feminists, because you identify as a feminist and you even blog at free.blogs, and also a lot of the ideas that this group that was disrupting you have, of course, are very anti-woman, very, very anti-LGBT, and but it's because I see it kind of like tearing our community apart. Like I'm on the left too, like you, but then there's just this extreme dialogue. There is total free speech on one side, and whether it's bigoted speech, whatever, and on the other side is no, this is a safe space, and any kind of criticism is bigotry. There was this one issue at this other university, but you've actually had universities disinvite you from speaking because of student groups as well.
Yeah, I had a student union at Warwick initially banned me from going because they said I would incite hatred and discriminate against Muslim students. And another student group, an atheist group, said when a student asked them to invite me at Sheffield, they said that they didn't want to invite me because my anti-Islamist position would upset the Islamic circle, and they want to promote interfaith relations with the Islamic circle, and they want to stress their humanism, not their atheism, the Sheffield Humanist Atheist and secular group, society group. So it is obviously pressure. I think one of the problems is that Islamists are using rights language now in order to, the fundamentalists are basically all the various religious right groups. So you'll have the Christian right doing it too. Christianity phobia, the Vatican will say at the UN, they are using rights language, which does muddy the waters because they're defending things that are oppressive, like the hijab as a woman's right to choose. So because they're using that language, it's becoming very difficult to challenge them with the same language, because we're both saying the same thing, but we mean very different things.
Christians will often talk about their religious freedom.
Exactly.
But their religious freedom will be the right to tell same-sex couples they can't marry.
Exactly. Yes. So
I've actually heard somebody explain it that they feel oppressed when they can't impose their religious laws on someone else.
Exactly. So they're using rights language, but it's because they want to discriminate against or actually, promote the violation of other people's rights just because they don't like them for some reason. So there's that aspect of it. The other aspect is that it is, this conflation between criticizing Islam with attacking Muslims. So because I criticize Islam, because I can criticize Islamists, therefore that makes me someone who will incite hatred against Muslims. And I actually spend a lot of my time defending Muslims, defending migrants against the far right that wants to try to use ex-Muslims in order to promote their hate politics,
I can certainly relate to that, because anytime I've said something in defense of people in Muslim countries, I'm criticized for defending Islam.
Yes.
Like so many of the far left, would have been accused of being apologists for Islam. And then if I criticize Islam, well then I'm somehow being racist. So I'm damned either way.
Yeah, I think the point is that it's good that there's so much concern about bigotry. I know you have people on the far right, or even people like Sam Harris saying, well, bigotry is an overused word. I would never say that, because I think bigotry is so horrendous, so dehumanizing, that we need to be very vigilant. We have a moral duty to stop bigotry. Nonetheless, we need to also make clear what is bigotry and what isn't.
Like, what's the solution? But it seems, even to me, someone who understands why people are trying to make safe spaces, because like in America, in the University of Missouri, they had an issue with racism where people were putting cotton balls all over the lawn of the black student group's building, and they wanted to discuss this without being disrupted by racists. And what's the solution? How do you like have a productive discussion where you're trying to address bigotry? You can't really, for me, you really can't set that wall up ahead of time. And then on the other side of it, how can you criticize bad ideas without looking like you're attacking a group of people and being a hateful and a bigot? Why can't people see nuance? Why is there this extreme, you're a bigot, or...
Yeah. Or shut, you have to shut, I mean, from my perspective, I think we have to defend free expression, first and foremost. I do think that unless people are inciting violence, that they should be able to speak, even if they're bigots. Because the reality is you can't shut down bigotry by censorship. That's not how, otherwise you wouldn't need a civil rights movement, you just shut down debate. Well, obviously that's not enough. Mm-hmm. In fact, you let bigotry grow when you shut down debate. Because you're not challenging it, because you think, well, they're not allowed to speak anymore, so we don't have a problem. So in effect, even if you are concerned about bigotry, which we all should be, then let the bigots talk. That leaves a moral duty upon us to respond to them, to challenge them, and obviously even the idea of bigotry is not, completely set in stone to some extent, because, for example, when you criticize Islam, it's not bigotry because it's an idea, but it is often perceived to be as such. So it's important to talk. That way we can be clear what is, what isn't, and to challenge it in the best way that we know how. But also I think, what's really important is that we defend people. So we should be able to criticize ideas, criticize the religious right, political movements, but, respecting human beings, not ideas. I don't think we should tolerate intolerable ideas, respect ideas we can disrespect ideas. But, if we defend people and humanity whilst we're being unequivocal in our criticisms, I think we can always move forward.
Are there limits to free speech is a problematic word to unpack, but that would take a long time, but are there limits to it? Like, do you see people putting cotton balls on the lawn of a black student group? Do you see that as free expression or of an idea, or where are there limits?
Yeah, I think if there's any form of incitement to violence, there should be limits. So I think it depends on, the proximity of the person that's feeling threatened, how real and possible those threats turning into violence are, that sort of thing. So I think those are things for the law to decide, but when you're talking about having discussions and debates in the public space on universities, we're talking, and I think expressing oneself is an important way of challenging bigotry as well, if bigotry is the issue at hand.
For me, I think the issue of being able to have a discussion as somebody who's a group that's having a problem with bigotry. For example, if you had an ex-Muslim group on campus and you had these people come in again and talk about, well, Islam means peace, and they gave you all these other Islamic apologetics, and you couldn't discuss the actual problem that ex-Muslims face. Like, they're just derailing your conversation. I don't think there's a way to set a wall up ahead of time to have this productive discussion. I think that you could ask people to leave. But
I think people can have safe spaces where they meet together privately to talk about things. We have ex-Muslim groups that meet. It's not open to the public. But I think when you do have a meeting that's open to the public, then you have to listen to views that are not necessarily you don't agree with. Yeah. And I think sometimes those views might actually help you move along in, you know, your way of thinking. It won't necessarily always be something bad. It could actually help you in your life and in your, you know, putting your ideas forward. So it could have a positive impact as well.
This is why they say the travel is broadening, because you get a breadth of perspectives.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So we're going to have to close it up. I want to thank you very much for your time.
Great, thanks.
And good night.